So unfortunately, the biggest loser of this war, regardless of how it turns out, okay, even if Americans were to win, the biggest loser is the GCC. Because for the past 30, 40 years, the GCC is basically built on a mirage, because it's essentially a desert with very little access to fresh water and very little agriculture. And so it couldn't really sustain a large population. But with the petrodollar and with American military protection, then the GCC nations felt free to invest in technology that allowed them to grow their population, right? So these desalination plants, modern infrastructure. So you sort of saw this massive growth in Dubai, in Qatar, in Riyadh. And what this war has done is shattered this mirage and revealed the limitations of the GCC. So for example, look at Dubai. So Dubai for many years has prided itself as this safe, very cosmopolitan, very open tax haven. So a lot of wealthy people immigrated to Dubai. But because of this war, and we're talking about like a few drones hitting hotels, it's really shattered the image of Dubai. And once you shatter this mirage, you can never, ever rebuild it again. So the idea of Dubai as like the future New York or London, the financial capital of the GCC, this mirage has evaporated.
Iran in 5 years?
So Iran is being devastated right now. So the Israelis and Americans are attacking critical infrastructure. So the Israelis attacked the largest gas field in Iran. The desalination plant was destroyed. But we also have to remember what is being hidden from us. And what's being hidden from us is the fact that the Israelis and Americans are trying to destroy the capacity of the state to govern the nation, basically destroy the state's monopoly on violence. And so what we're hearing are attacks on police officers, on military installations, and there's talk of special forces going into Iran and starting to fund dissident groups, right? Like the Kurds and the Palakis in southeast Iran. So no matter what happens in this war, it's going to be very hard for the government to maintain national control, even if they were to survive this war. And also another huge issue for Iran is that for the past few years, it suffered drought issues. So its agriculture was heavily impacted. They were actually talking about moving Tehran, like moving these millions of people out of the city of Tehran because the capital could no longer sustain this large population. So this war will only exacerbate these environmental issues, especially with the attacks on critical civilian infrastructure, for example, dams, reservoirs, desalination plants. And it's going to take years and years for Iran to recover from this war as a nation. And you have basically the stirring of ethnic sentiments. You have the destruction of the state's capacity to deliver basic services. But the good news for Iran is that it seems as though they will be able to maintain control over the Strait of Hormuz. And that is critical because now they're able to charge a toll on anyone who uses the Strait of Hormuz. And they talk about 10%, which should generate about $800 billion a year annually for Iran. So the nation will be destroyed in this war, but if it's able to harness the pride of the Persian people, if it's able to unify the Persian people, and it's able to leverage the resource of the Strait of Hormuz effectively, then we can expect Iran to rise again in like 10 to 20 years' time.
Where is Israel in a few years from now?
So if you look at the main beneficiary of this war, it is Israel. Because Israel has an ambition called the Greater Israel Project, which is what they believe that their God, Yahweh, promised to their ancestor, Abraham. And so they believe that Yahweh promised Abraham all the land from the Nile in Egypt to Euphrates in Iraq. If you look at the entire map, it also extends to Anatolia, which is southern Turkey, and even into Saudi Arabia. So if you look at what's happening, well, it's convenient in that the GCC is being destroyed. Saudi Arabia will probably be drawn into this war. It is possible Turkey will be drawn into this war as well. And this war allows Israel to remake the Middle East in its own image. Also, if you think about it, according to game theory, the main constraint to Israel achieving the Greater Israel Project is actually not Iran, but America, because America guarantees the military safety and protection of the GCC, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, UAE, these nations. And so if Israel is become dominant, it's become the hegemon of the Middle East, it needs to figure out how to remove America from the equation. And quite honestly, this war has shown the limitations of American power. It's really annoyed the American people. The American people do not want this war. And American people don't even understand why America is still in the Middle East. And so it's very possible that regardless of what happens in this war, America is forced to withdraw from the Middle East, in which case Israel is able to achieve its Greater Israel Project.
Standard security cameras cannot prevent break-ins. They can help catch burglars after they've done it, but that's a little late, no? They can steal your stuff, scare your family, maybe hurt you. You need a security system that will stop home invasions before they occur. That's why we always recommend SimpliSafe. SimpliSafe is a whole home security system backed by 24/7 monitoring agents you can rely on, even when you're gone. Proactive crime prevention, it's not reactive, and that makes the difference. Plus, no required long-term contract that gives you flexibility to switch if you don't like it. That's unlikely, though, because we think SimpliSafe is excellent, and they're so confident in the protection, they back it with an anti-theft guarantee. Used by over 4 million people, 20 years of experience, named Best Home Security System of 2026. It's the peak of the industry. And right now, listeners to this show can get 50% off their new SimpliSafe system at simplisafe.com/Tucker. It's simplisafe.com/Tucker. There is no safe like SimpliSafe. It was clear to me that was part of the motive, that Israel understood this and roped the United States into this war in order to get the United States out, in order to hurt the United States and get the United States out of the Middle East. Do you think that will be successful?
I think the way this war is going, this plan will work. And the reason why is the American military has not fought a real war for decades. 2003, this war in Iraq was not a real war because Saddam Hussein basically gave up. He didn't have air defense because those economic sanctions had destroyed his economy. And his logic was this: let the Americans invade. They can't possibly invade because if they destroy us, that would make Iran, which has hostilities against America, the regional power. So why would America do this? It is self-defeating. It is not logical. It is not rational. So I'm not worried about them attacking me. And he was surprised when they did attack because it was not logical. It was not rational. But they did attack. And it was a cakewalk. It took about 2 weeks. America achieved air supremacy very quickly, and they rolled into Baghdad very, very quickly and toppled the regime. So that was a very quick and easy war that fit the American military doctrine of shock and awe. Iran is completely different. And the American military does not want to fight this war because they've war gamed this countless times. And each war game, they discover that they lose because the American military, it's too bulky. It's not as nimble and resilient as the Iranian military. And we're seeing that play out right now where you have these devastating carriers, the Abraham Lincoln and the Gerald Ford, threatening Iran, but not actually doing anything because they're afraid of getting too close to the coast of Iran because then they become susceptible to drone strikes as well as hypersonics. So the Iranians have been preparing this for 20 plus years. They know the entire American playbook, and they have the perfect strategy to counter the American playbook. So America will have a really tough time winning this war. The great problem, the big question now is, will America send in ground troops? Because once America sends in ground troops, then it becomes plot committed. It's mission creep, sunk cost fallacy. It'll be like Vietnam all over. So right now there's talk of 2,500 Marines who've coming in from Okinawa. They'll be in the Middle East in about 7 days' time. And the rumor is, and I don't know, but the rumor is the intention is for them to take Karg Island, which is the main oil depot for Iran. So Iran exports 9% of its oil from that facility, the island. And if the Marines were to take it, it would be great optics. Trump would look good on TV. It'd be a great boost for American morale. The problem is that you can take it, but you can't hold it because it's too close to Iranian coast, and the Iranians can attack with artillery, with drones, okay? Which means that you now have to take on the coast. You have to occupy the coast and create a forward operating base. But then you're exposed to the Zagros Mountains, right? Which means that you're now forced to occupy the mountains as well. So it's mission creep. It's exactly like Vietnam, where in 1965, 3,000 Marines went into Da Nang to occupy an air base. And like 4 or 5 years later, you have a 500,000 troops, right? So it started off as a very limited, self-defined mission, but then it just balloons. So America could find itself in the situation very quickly.
If you were the commander-in-chief of the United States, what would you do at this point as of today?
Commander-in-chief meaning Donald Trump?
Yeah. You get to make the decisions. What does America do next if it's acting in its own interest, if it's trying to preserve its power and wealth at this point? What does it do?
Well, first of all, I would acknowledge that all these events are interconnected, right? So this trade war with China, this war in Ukraine, this war in the Middle East, it's all interconnected because the American empire is too overstretched and it has its fingers on everything. And so it allows its enemies to provoke it into these never-ending wars. So what I would do is basically sit down everyone, okay, including Russia, China, Iran, and say, it's time for a new world order where we are partners in this relationship, right? Before America was the hegemon, before the US dollar was the world reserve currency. But now what we want to do is open a dialogue where everyone is respected, where America is no longer the bully, but a willing partner in creating a new economic order that benefits everyone and not just a few.
I think that's the wisest possible advice and probably the only path that preserves civilization. But the one country standing in the way of that is Israel, which is the only beneficiary of this war, as you just said. I think that's true. Can you think of another beneficiary other than Israel of this war?
Well, Russia benefits, right? Because Russia is trying to win this war in Ukraine.
That's correct.
And America is forced to lift oil sanctions. And so now Russia is now able to take all these war profits, right? And then help the Iranians, finance the Iranians in the struggle against the Americans and the Israelis. So the Russians also benefit tremendously from this war.
Yeah, but fair point. Israel has to be constrained by the United States in order to do what you just recommended it do. Is that possible? Does the American president have the authority to control its client state?
So if you look at the domestic situation in Israel, Israel no longer behaves rationally. It is sort of overtaken by eschatological fever, right? So if you look at videos coming out of Israel, there are rabbis going around saying that this war in the Middle East, even though it's destroying Tel Aviv, it's good for us because this will lead to the coming of our Messiah. So they believe that it is when Israel is under the most strain, when the very existence of Israel is threatened, then God will intervene because the Jewish people will come together as a nation again and commit themselves, renew their faith in God. And once God sees the blind, trusting, absolute faith of the Jewish people, then he will save his people by sending his Messiah, who will then redeem the Jewish people. So another way of saying this is secular temporal matters don't really matter. This war in the Middle East, not an issue. What matters is divinity. What matters is our relationship with God.
Yes.
So what matters is faith. If nuclear bombs go flying, doesn't really matter. We will know how this war develops just based on geography, okay? So this is a map. And this map, even if you don't really know the war, even if you don't know the participants, even if you don't know the weaponry, this map will tell you exactly how this war will progress. All right, so some certain things to keep in mind about this map. This is what we call this area, okay, really small, it's 33 kilometers wide, okay? People can swim across it. It's really, really narrow, okay? This small area, guys, it's called the Strait of Hormuz, all right? And it's important because it's really the center of the world. This one area is the nexus, the pivot of the world. Let me explain why. First of all, from the GCC, you have 20% of all the world's oil flowing through this narrow strait. Where does it go, guys? It goes to Asia, India, Pakistan, South Korea, China, Japan. India depends on 60% of its oil from this area. China depends on 40%. Japan, 75%. Prime Minister Takeichi of Japan has said that, listen, if the Strait of Hormuz closes, we will run out of oil in about 8-9 months. The entire Japanese economy would collapse in 8-9 months if the Strait of Hormuz were to close. And guess what? The Iranians have closed the Strait of Hormuz, okay? So we can expect that the entire global economy will suffer greatly over the next few months. All right, so that's point number one. Point number two is, okay, so the GCC sends oil across the Strait of Hormuz, and what do they get back in return? Food, guys. All right, so people don't appreciate the GCC, but it is really the linchpin of the American empire. Because what is the American empire? The American empire is the petrodollar. All right? The idea of the petrodollar is this. The US dollar is worth nothing. It's only valuable if people want it. But the GCC says that if you want oil from us, you have to pay us in US dollars. Okay? Then that is the basis of the value of the US dollar. So, if the GCC collapses, the American economy and the American empire both collapse at the same time. The problem, though, is the GCC is an artificial construct of empire. It does not exist naturally. Why? Because there's no food, there's no oil, no water. Okay, guys? No food, no water. So these cities are able to grow in the millions because of all these petrodollars flowing in. If you close off the Strait of Hormuz, there's no food coming in, right? They're all gonna starve. How much food does the GCC get from overseas? 80%. 80% of all the food it consumes comes from overseas, that it imports. It doesn't grow by itself, it imports, all right? So the Strait of Hormuz is really key. And again, the Iranians will close it in order to strangle the global economy and therefore bankrupt the American empire, all right? Second thing you will notice is these mountains. These mountains is what we call Iran, all right? This is Iran. This is GCC, okay? This is not a fair matchup, right? Because these are mountains. And what can you do in mountains? Well, you can hide rocket bases. You can hide drone bases. You can hide missiles. And that's the entire Iranian offensive strategy, all right? From here, they can hide missiles and drones from which to attack the GCC. And what are they attacking? They're attacking three things, right? They're attacking American military bases. American military bases. That's number one, okay? Is it possible for the Americans to defend against these attacks? The answer is no, it's not. It's the silliest thing in the world. You have all these bases in the Middle East, but you cannot defend them against the Iranians. That's kind of strange. Okay, but that's number one. Number two is oil and energy. How hard is it to blow up an oil field with a drone? Not hard at all. Can you defend these oil fields? No, you cannot. All right. Number three, and this is most important, is water. Okay. You guys don't know this, but the GCC has little access to fresh water. So the only way that it can produce water is what we call desalination plants, okay? These factories that take salt water and then through an electrical chemical process turn it into fresh water for the population to use. 60% of the water supply in the GCC comes from desalination plants, okay? 60%. Is it hard to blow up a desalination plant using a drone? The answer is, it's very easy. You understand? Okay? So you have this absurd situation where Iran is a mountain fortress where it can hide its offensive capacity, and the GCC, it's just this desert, this flat desert, and it is exposed to attack, and there's nothing it can do about it. Okay? So at any point in this war, the Iranians can choose to just destroy the entire GCC, and there's nothing that anyone can do about it. Okay? But Iran also has a weakness, okay? And this is fundamental. So Iran also has a water problem, okay? So for the longest time, they suffered a drought issue, okay? Just climate change. And so what the plan of the Israelis and Americans is destroy the water supply of the Iranians. Because the fortress, it is a mountain fortress, but it can also be a mountain prison as well, where people are trapped inside with no access to water. Okay, so what we're going to see right now, we're already seeing attacks on civilian infrastructure, hospitals. In the future, you'll see attacks on water supply, on dams, on reservoirs, on power plants. The point, the idea is to make Iran so inhabitable that the people will have to rebel against the people, or there'll be a refugee crisis in Iran. Okay? So as you can see from this map, this war, it is the end of the world. Okay? Both sides have the potential to destroy each other. It's really a question of how far do they want to go. Right? We can also say this is almost a game of chicken. Okay? We can blow each other up. How far do you want to go? And the problem is this. The problem is that the Iranians are Shia, which believes in martyrdom. And you've killed the religious leader, the Ayatollah Khamenei. So they're willing to go very, very far. The GCC countries are Muslim, but they're materialistic. They love money. And also, most of the population are expatriates, foreigners. 90% of Dubai are foreigners. Guess what's going to happen if they suffer? They're all going to run away. Okay? So this is not a fair matchup. The big question that people have is, first of all, are the Americans going to use ground troops? Because the only way that you can defeat Iran is by using ground troops, okay? That's a big question we'll look at over the next few weeks. Will America send its army, 500,000, 2 million soldiers to topple the government? Okay, that's question number one. Question number two, nuclear weapons. If you're losing a war, would you choose to use nuclear weapons? Okay, that's another big question that we have, okay? Another big question that we have is who gets involved? Because this situation is so dire that Europe, okay, specifically Germany, France, and Britain are talking about entering this war. And guess what? If that happens, it is possible that Russia and China will also enter this war on the side of the Iranians. This is World War III, okay? Because of the importance of the Strait of Hormuz, because of the importance of the Middle East, everyone has to get involved at some point. And we're gonna use game theory to really try to understand what's happening on the ground and where this could lead us. All right, so again, the key is the GCC, all right? So the game plan is this. You have to destroy the GCC. Why? Because the GCC is the linchpin of the American empire. So what the GCC does is this. It sells oil, and then for US dollars. Where does it put US dollars? It puts US dollars into the American stock market. All right, so this is investments of the UAE, okay, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait into the US financial markets. As you can see, from 2012 up to today, it's been exploding, all right? Because the US financial markets is one of the safest places where you can put your money. The intention is this. The intention is, hey, if I cut off oil and these countries no longer have access to US dollars, they're forced to spend whatever resources they have on protecting themselves, okay? And then guess what happens? The stock market collapses. The stock market collapses. The stock market is the real growth engine of the US economy. The entire US economy collapses with it, all right? There are about maybe 7 companies in America that accounts for about a quarter of stock market growth, okay? These 7 companies, of course, are AI companies. NVIDIA, Microsoft, Google, Apple, okay? These are the companies, and then these companies are heavily invested in by the GCC nations. So if these nations are no longer able to invest in the stock market, these companies will collapse in value. And with that, that would lead to economic depression in America. Okay, does that make sense? All right, so that is the situation for today. Today was just an overview, guys, okay? I know we covered a lot. I know there's a lot to take in, but over the next few weeks, we will explore each issue in depth and really understand what's really going on, okay?